Hello everyone, this is Dave again with another rocket build, and today I'm building the Up Aerospace Spaceloft semi-scale kit, and this is produced by Estes. However, right now at the time of this video production it's only available as a bulk pack, so you probably won't be able to find this as a single kit. However, the bulk pack is not terribly expensive, so if you've got a bunch of friends who want to get together and build a bunch of rockets, this is actually not too bad. I think I paid around $50 for the set out of one of the online stores, and so that breaks down to just a couple of bucks per rocket. Here I'm just going to open up one of the kits from inside, and we'll check for parts. It's a fairly simple kit. There aren't a whole lot of pieces to it. And so this is good if you want to do just a quick kit, maybe with a bunch of new Rocketeers. Because of the small size of the parts though, this probably isn't the best one for very young Rocketeers. But you know, you've got a group of say 8 to 12 year olds or so, this would be a great first rocket. So let's start off here. We've got the body tube, fin assembly, self-stick decals, and then in the little package here we have the nose cone, some nose weight, and don't throw that away, this is necessary for stable flight, engine hook, streamer, and shock cord. There's also a little ring in here this is part of the launch lug assembly, and the other part of the launch lug assembly is built into the fin canister here. So my kit's got everything that it's supposed to have, and I'm just going to clear this away and we'll get started. So the first step is to assemble the nose cone, including adding the nose weight here. And I suspect Estes just makes these in a kind of a standard amount, because what we're going to do here is cut this into fourths and then discard one of the fourths. Okay, so we need 3 of those fourths, and it doesn't have to be completely exact. I'm just going to take one of those out. Okay, and now it says to make this into little worm-like pieces. You don't have to do too much because this isn't too long of a nose cone. All right, but then just stuff each piece in, and then tamp it down with a pencil, or in this case the end of my hobby knife. And actually after you get that first one in, the other 2 can pretty much just go in straight. Okay, and again, this isn't optional. If you don't have these pieces in, the rocket may not have stable flight, and that can be dangerous. So we are essentially filling up this nose cone with the clay there. Okay, and just wipe off any excess. And I would also just kind of wipe off the inside lip here. Okay, and then the next thing we're going to do is you're going to need some plastic cement, and this is another consideration if you're building this rocket with very young Rocketeers. Make sure they don't get this all over the place. Okay, and so we just want a thin bead of glue. You don't want, it's actually too much there, so be careful there. And then just take the base part here, put that on, give it a twist back and forth a couple of times to get good adhesion. Make sure it's straight, and then we're going to simply set that aside. Our next step is to draw a line down the length of the body tube, And you can do this on a door frame. I'm going to use this line marking guide from Estes. And because we have a black body tube here, it's going to be hard to see the line. I recommend using a fine pencil. Okay, and just draw this down. You don't want to do this too heavily because we want to be able to erase the line later on. Okay, so it's actually almost more of an indentation than a drawn line, but that's fine. And then we want to measure 1.5 inches from either end of the rocket. Okay, so I'm going to find 1.5 inches. I'm just going to put a little cross line here along my line that I drew previously, and I'm going to do the same thing at the other end. So 1.5 inches here. And now, using my hobby knife, I'm going to cut 1/8 inch or about a 3 millimeter slit at each of those marks. So come back around here. There's one slit, and I would start off cutting these smaller than you think they should be because you can enlarge them later, but it's really hard to make them small again if you get them too big. One of these will be used for the engine hook, the other one will be used for the shock cord. Now we're going to take the fin assembly and we're going to slide that down toward one of our slots here. Now before we bring it all the way down, we need to insert the engine hook into one of those slots. Okay, so here again, this is where I wanted to make sure that I'm not too big. That's a little bit too small. And so here I'm just going to widen this just slightly. And here, if you bend your knife back and forth a little bit like this, that'll help widen the hole without necessarily cutting it more. If you do need to cut it more, that's fine. And you know, this has got quite an overhang here, and that's because this also acts as the engine block. This does not have a separate thrust ring. Alright, so that's going to go in like this. And I'm just going to make sure that everything is fitting here. So this will eventually slide all the way down to become flush with the aft end of the rocket. Alright, so now I'm going to bring this back up, and I'm going to add a bead of plastic cement right around here. So just a little bit down from where the hook went in. Okay, and try and avoid getting it right on the hook so that you don't end up with plastic cement in this opening. And now you're simply going to slide this over. And theoretically now, all of that cement should now be spread inside the fin assembly. It's a good idea now to let this dry for at least 10 to 15 minutes before we go on to the other pieces so we don't accidentally bump this. Our next step is to install the shock cord, and that's going to go into this second slot here that we made. You might need to widen that or open it up a little bit, and then push the shock cord in. And you might find that using the tip of a pencil or a pen will help get that in there, at least to start. And then you can just push in a little bit at a time here. And usually once it gets started, it's fairly easy to continue. So I'm just pushing this in a few millimeters at a time, and eventually it's going to come out the top there. If it doesn't, if it goes down the opposite direction, you can just use a pencil to push that out. But once you've got it here, now you can simply pull this through, but don't pull it out all the way. Okay, we want to leave about 1/4 inch here, or about 6 millimeters, hanging out. And then this piece will thread through the rest of the shock cord. And this actually has an up and down position, so it's got a tapered edge on the top side, the forward side, and then the back or aft side is squared off here. Okay, so this is going to fit down. Now I haven't glued anything yet, I'm just going to dry fit this, but this is going to go over the shock cord that we left hanging out here, and then we need to turn this so that it aligns with our rear launch lug here and the front. And so you can do this by sight, by kind of looking down through it. Also, if you have an available launch rod or just a piece of a launch rod here, you can thread that through to make sure that everything's straight. Okay, so again, I don't have any glue on this yet. When you've got it where you want it to be, go ahead and bring this back up. And here we're just going to put another bead of glue all the way around this. And I'm going to start right at the top there. That's, again, be careful you don't get too much here. My glue really wants to run. I'm going to take some of that back off. So if you have too much here, it's all going to build up on the back side, and that could interfere with your launch lug. Okay, so now I'm just going to bring this back over, and now I'm going to take my launch rod, run that through, and you want to do that step fairly quickly because we want this to be able to be workable before the glue sets. Okay, so if you've got it properly aligned here, this should be completely parallel with the launch lugs and the body tube. And again, if you don't have one of these, sight down through it so that you can see both launch lugs that are in line, and those should be parallel with the rocket body. And then again, let's go ahead and just let this sit for 10 minutes or so to let that glue dry before we do anything else to it. Once we've given the glue a little time to dry here, we can go back and gently erase the remnants of our line. Now there's still maybe, if it caused a little depression there like it did on mine, you may still see the remnants of there. But for the most part, this will be covered up with a decal. Okay, and if you need to, you can also run over this with a black marker. That'll kind of hide some of that line as well. But actually from a distance, even if you have the little indentation like I've got here, it's not going to be that noticeable. Okay, next step is to apply the other end of the shock cord to the nose cone. And here we're just going to put in a double knot or a couple of half hitches. And you don't want a whole lot hanging out on the end there, but you also don't want it completely flush. So I'm going to put in 2 half hitches, just like that, and now I'm going to pull it from both directions to make sure that that knot is firmly in place. Okay. And I'm just going to clip off a little bit here because I don't want this edge to get caught between the body tube and the nose cone shoulder here. And then if you want to strengthen this a little bit more, you can add a little dab of white glue or wood glue to the knot and just work it in. Don't use plastic cement for this. Okay, so if all you have with you is plastic cement, just leave this unglued. But here all I'm going to do is just take that little dab and just work it into the knot here. And that's just going to help keep that knot from coming loose. And then our final step will be to tape the streamer here onto the shock cord. Okay, and what we're going to do, according to the instructions, they use clear tape, like transparent tape, scotch tape, whatever you want to call it. You can also use electrical tape, which I tend to do a lot. Even masking tape will work here, although the masking tape might come off more quickly. Okay, I've got some electrical tape handy here, so I'm just going to take a small amount of this, and what I want to do is have a length that's equal to the width of my streamer. And I'm just going to put this so I've got a little bit of overhang on each side here, and I'm going to put my tape directly over that so that it's got adhesion on both sides of the shock cord. Okay, now here's probably the hardest part, is getting all of this to go into the rocket. So if you're just storing this, we'll just fold and roll up the streamer. But if you're getting ready for launch, you're going to use a very small amount of recovery wadding. Take a standard sheet of recovery wadding, cut it into fourths, and you'll probably use 2 of those fourth sheets in here. And then do the streamer. Okay. But instead of trying to just start by rolling this at the end, it's actually easier if you start by folding it over itself a couple of times here. So I'm going to make a couple of folds, and this just makes a shorter length that you have to work with. And then I'm going to roll it up. All right. And then once you've got that, then we're just going to put the shock cord down inside, and since this is such a short shock cord going into a skinny tube, you may have to stuff it down there a little bit using a pencil or a handle here. And again, if you're doing this preparatory to launch, you should have your recovery wadding in first so that it protects the shock cord and, more importantly, the streamer. All right, and I'm just going to slide that down and ease it in. If this is taking a lot of pressure, then try re-folding and re-rolling it. Okay, and then that nose cone goes on there. Okay, and now we're going to test this. You want to make sure it's not too loose, and so if you shake this upside down, that nose cone should not come out. But it should also not take a lot of tension to pull that out. If it does, then just take a little bit of fine sandpaper, and mine's just a little bit tight, And you can sand this around its circumference. And then test it again. There. Okay, so now it's actually a little bit loose now. Yep, did too much. So if you have a nose cone that's too loose, you can put a little bit of masking tape on that. And you don't need a lot. In fact, many times you won't even need to go around the entire circumference. I'm just going to put a little bit on here. And I think what may have happened when I first tested this is my shock cord may have got caught between the shoulder and the body tube, so it made it seam tighter. Okay, that's still a little bit loose. So I'll put just a bit more over here. And this is something that can also change over time if you happen to launch this a lot, or if the temperature changes a lot from where you're building to where you're launching. You might have to change it in the field. Okay, that's a good fit there. Now, before applying decals, I recommend that you wash your hands thoroughly with soap and water so that you don't have residue from the clay or the glue or anything else on your fingers that might get in the way. And also, fingerprints are going to show up on the self-stick decals. So try and keep that to a minimum. And I recommend putting your decals along the same face that your line was on, and so that will help hide any residual material from the line. There are 3 decals on this. So this main one that says Up Aerospace, that's going to go between the fin can and the upper launch lug there. And it's pretty much all the space you have. Now you may, one consideration that would be against doing your line here is you do still have the engine clip down here, and if I look at this closely, the decal would end up going over the engine clip. So that's also a consideration. So if we don't want that to happen, we're going to have to turn this over, and so we're going to have one facing area here that has no clip and no launch lug. I don't recommend putting it on the launch lug side here, just because the process of launching, you may get some rubbing of the launch rod against this, and that's going to decrease the life of your decal. So the main one will go on the length of the rocket here. The flag will go up here next to the nose cone, and then the one in between here, it's kind of hard to see on the camera, it lists the recommended motors. And I recommend putting that down here somewhere near the base. You could put it on this side where the clip is, just put it right above the engine clip. Okay. These do tend to be fairly sticky, so you want to make sure that you've got it pretty much in place the first time. Okay, so I'm going to run mine here. So I'm going to try to just lightly tack this. Yeah, that's what I was afraid of. When this sticks, it sticks pretty quickly and it may pull off the color. But I'm going to use my fin here as kind of the alignment for the upper edge. Okay, and you'll see I've got fingerprints there. It's almost unavoidable. Now I'm just going to lightly go across this, and make sure that it's actually straight. At this point, I can probably still peel this off without doing too much damage to the finish. Alright, and it does appear to be as straight as I'm going to get it. And so now I'm just going to start at one edge, push that down, and then come down a little bit, push that down. And so I'm just going back and forth a little bit at a time along the length, and pushing those down so that I get as much air out of there as I can. You could try wearing rubber gloves to help avoid the fingerprints in there, but I think you'll find that gloves present their own problems, as you don't have quite as much dexterity with them, and sometimes the rubber can stick to the decals as well, making your alignment come off a bit. Okay, but now you can just go through and rub off all the air as much as you can. Alright, and then for our flag, that's going to go right above here. For the moment, I'm going to remove that masking tape. And I'm actually going to use the excuse me, edge of the tube there as a guide. So that the edge of the decal there is going to go flush with the edge of the tube. Okay, and then that'll just go straight across there. And then my engine decal can go down here. And you don't need to put this on if you have, if you write down your recommended motors somewhere. I really like to have these though, so I'm just going to stick this centered on the fin and right above the engine hook. Okay, so we are finished with this model. Hope you have a good flight with it, and come back and see my other videos. Have a good day.